I'll wait till, okay, here we go.
Hi, everyone. So as everybody's coming back in from the waiting room, first, welcome back. I just wanted to do a little plug for the Schoenberg Institute's journal. Their fall issue, our fall issue just came out today, just arrived at my desk today. And Penn Press is offering a 25% discount for symposium attendees. And I will put that information in the chat room, sorry, in the chat space, and also a link to the journal's website. So please consider subscribing, get your institutions to subscribe. It's a wonderful journal. And we also have really great covers that we're very proud of. All right, I'll hand it over to Amey now to begin.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. We are gathering now for a panel discussion continuing on the theme of access and discovery, inclusion and exclusion. We are once again recording this session. I will introduce all three of our panelists at the beginning. Each of them will speak for about 15 minutes, and then the discussion will be open to all. As before, if you would like to ask a question, please use the chat function. Either write your question there or make a note that you have a question. So let's begin. Nicholas Herman is curator of manuscripts here at the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. His research focuses on manuscript illumination and its intersection with other media in 15th and early 16th century Europe. In 2018, he was invited to give the Bibliothèque Nationale de France's Léopold de Lille lectures, which were subsequently published. This year, he held a fellowship at Ethiopian and curated the exhibit Making the Renaissance Manuscript, Discoveries from the Philadelphia Libraries, which grew out of the Bibliophily project. The physical exhibit was cut short by the COVID-19 shutdown, but the beautiful and extensive exhibit catalog is still available, as is an online version of the exhibit. At the University of Cambridge, Orietta de Rold is a university lecturer, a fellow at St. John's College, and a member of the Center for Material Texts. Her research interests are in medieval literature and texts from roughly 1100 to 1500, Chaucer, and digital humanities. Cambridge University Press has just published her paper in medieval England, From Pulp to Fictions, presenting research funded by a British Academy Mid-Career Fellowship. The Cambridge Companion to Medieval British Manuscripts, edited with Elaine Traharn, was also published this year. And Kelly Tuttle is based here at the Penn Libraries as the cataloging librarian for the Manuscripts of the Muslim World project, a cooperative project funded by the Council on Library and Information Resources to catalog and digitize Islamic manuscripts from Columbia University, the Free Library of Philadelphia, the University of Pennsylvania, and other local repositories. Within the field of Islamic manuscript culture, Kelly is particularly interested in information transmission in the pre-modern world, both as it appears in commentary and abridgment, but also as it appears in provenance records and notes. So Nick, will you start us off, please?
Great, thank you. I just had a very sudden computer crash 1 minute ago, which is very inopportune, but it seems to be fixed now. So sorry if I caused any kind of delay. Thank you, Amey, for the introduction. Thank you, everyone, for being here this afternoon, I guess. I found the presentation so far yesterday and today really enlightening, stimulating. Both the presentations and the lightning round videos on YouTube. Today, particularly, we've heard a trio of talks about access, discovery, and inclusion. We began with Laura Morreale, who kind of gave us the backstory of these amazing transcription challenges that she has been running, coordinating during the COVID epidemic. And this is a kind of work of, well, profound collaboration among specialists. It's been an effort of really enthusiastic community building. I like knowing how it started, kind of a Twitter conversation with Ben Albritton. But yeah, so crowdsourcing from a kind of specialized crowd with very precise goals in mind, which I think are very helpful. We've had a different type of crowdsourcing project at Penn, a Judaica DH project, that's more of a citizen science project with kind of people from all over with no need for special training, attempting kind of elementary transcriptions. And this is on a very large data set, and it's ongoing. It's a much longer term project, but the Laura Morreale's transcription challenges, I think, are amazing in their kind of brevity, and that something concrete can be accomplished in such a short time. We then heard from Alessandro Bausi, who is charting major manuscript cultures through these incredibly long-term research projects, charting multiple languages, and doing beginning with historical cataloging and moving outward from there. I thought that was a really interesting and useful approach. And he mentioned not wanting to lose the work that had been done in the past, often the fairly distant past, 19th century philologists and so on. And so that was a fascinating look into a very large scale project. And then we heard from Danielle Gullo at vHMML, and a very specific project that's extremely important, as Lynn mentioned in the comments afterwards. An authority file for the heritage of understudied Christian and Islamic traditions that goes hand in hand with vHMML's now multi-decade efforts at recording endangered manuscripts in conflict zones. And so the authority file as a way forward, a specialized authority file where the standard tools won't do. And I think there's lots to discuss here. I'm not a specialist in these areas. I come to you as a curator and as an art historian. And so I wanted to offer kind of a few more points for conversation that dovetail with some of what we heard today and yesterday, with some of the lightning rounds, and also with, I think, some of what we will hear tomorrow. So if we're talking about access, discovery, and inclusion, up to now we've discussed these aspects in terms of, making things more accessible to people who already know they want manuscript data, manuscript information. But another challenge we could talk about is, how do we get new audiences interested in manuscript studies, more diverse audiences, younger audiences? These questions are really crucial to the future of so many of our disciplines and of our collective work. We need to get more people involved. And this is particularly important. This is important everywhere, but it's particularly important in North America, where manuscripts do not necessarily always form a kind of background element of cultural patrimony, right? And again, in the North American space, but elsewhere as well, ready access to real manuscripts is not always possible or easy, especially nowadays with COVID. So how can we get new audiences interested in these objects? We know them well, right? We have studied them in person. We know what it's like in normal, quote unquote, normal times to access them. But that access remains a privilege. So how do we communicate, especially in the time of COVID, the kind of bundle of sensations around consulting a real manuscript? We know the idiosyncrasies of various repositories, various libraries, archives around the world. But how do we communicate some of that process and some of the let's call it the joy of the original object? How do we transmit a sense of the aura of the original? And not just in the current digital moment, but also, in the foreseeable future, when travel and exhibitions and mobility in general, it seems like it will be restricted, financially, logistically, for some time to come. For established scholars, let alone graduate students or students beginning their studies, the idea of spending months at work in a reading room of a major library seems pretty remote right now. So I mentioned the aura of the original. This is a purposeful reference to Walter Benjamin's article on the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, which of course is standard reading for art historians, but really for anyone, I think, interested in digital materiality today, even though the article, of course, was written in 1935. Benjamin writes that the sphere of authenticity of the object is outside of the technical. So it's not just a matter of reproducing an object in its entirety. There's something inherent to the object that goes beyond its physical attributes, its existence in time and space that make it unique and that make it what it is. And I think this is eminently true. This is still true today. Technology can only go so far in conveying a sense of the original. And I do think that we have to be open in this moment to the potential that digital technologies, all of the work we've been doing, it might still fail. We might not get to a satisfying simulacrum or a satisfying access to the original in this virtual world. We have to allow that, the brief of this conference posed questions, can we do this? What can, what progress can we make, if any, in this digital moment? And, I think we have to be at least open to the possibility that some of our approaches and some of our tools just won't get us there. And we also, of course, as most of us know, we have to keep our minds on the originals. And Michael Camille, the art historian, famously wrote a kind of rebuttal, in a sense, to Benjamin, the Très Richer, an illuminated manuscript in the age of mechanical reproduction. This article from Critical Inquiry from 1990. Where he kind of critiques the fact that we only know this manuscript through its mediations, right? Because we don't have access to the original. The original is so precious that nobody can see it. And so he, raises the question, if no one has access to the original manuscript, why does it exist at all? And, I think our contemporary moment bears this out. People want to see originals, even in digital form, right? Look at the popularity of my colleague Dot Porter's manuscript orientation videos, where she handles a manuscript with an overhead camera. These are hugely popular, and similar videos on social media, hugely popular because people want this access. They want this kind of thrill value, the sensation of looking over the shoulder of a privileged person. So how do we kind of allow access in this time? Normally we have exhibitions of manuscripts, right? I just curated one that was shut down during in March after a month because of COVID, right? But even for me, even as a curator, and many curators I think will admit this, an exhibition of manuscripts or rare books in vitrines is fundamentally pretty unsatisfying. It's better when a exhibition accompanies perhaps a digitization project, and this is what we tried to do with my exhibition. Sorry, pardon me. Just going to share my slides here. There we go. With my exhibition, Making the Renaissance Manuscript, that shut down, and also my colleague Dot's exhibition, Medieval Life, which has been postponed, but is now slated to open at the Free Library of Philadelphia. These two exhibitions accompanied the Bibliophily project. So visitors to the exhibitions who are maybe non-experts can learn that all of the items on display have been digitized, and they can then spend time at home or at the library looking at the digitized versions. There are other kind of more analog approaches if we're talking about exhibitions, non-digital approaches in exhibitions. I've seen exhibitions where a gallery attendant will have a leaf from a choir book, for example, on view that members of the public can touch. And this is these are non-irreplaceable but original items, and the public gets a thrill from doing this. I've also seen exhibitions where a binder of manuscript cuttings under glass can be manipulated, and members of the public can use an endoscopic microscope, USB microscope, pretty inexpensive thing, to go over the glass and to have projected onto a screen, you know, a macro photographic dynamic reproduction of manuscript details. Of course, there are virtual exhibitions. You know, both these exhibitions that I've just mentioned have virtual components. You know, those vary in the level of sort of satisfaction and kind of the thrill of the enjoyment of the virtual exhibition. And I have to say that in this space of the virtual exhibition, a lot of art dealers have actually led the way because, you know, money is on the line. And so during the COVID period, a lot of high-end art fairs have shifted to virtual viewing rooms where you can walk around a gallery in a very compelling way. Teaching after exhibitions, I think, is an extraordinarily important aspect of what we do. How do we teach manuscripts in a digital world? Amazingly, just today, I found out that a colleague and friend of mine, Sonia Drimmer at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, is teaching a graduate seminar next year, all that's kind of attuned to the current moment. It's all about Hildegard Scivias, right? And so a manuscript that doesn't exist anymore. And so this is a course that's all about the kind of reproductions and replications of this manuscript. And another current event, another colleague and friend, this time at the University of Pittsburgh, Shirin Fawzi, and her students have put together a digital exhibition that just opened 2 days ago, a nostalgic filter, just another term from Michael Camille, on facsimiles of manuscripts in the digital age. Something else that's pretty interesting, I think, that's not quite a digital project, but it's something that is maybe more feasible in the COVID age of restricted budgets. Les Enlumineurs, a dealer, manuscript dealer, well known, they have this manuscripts in the curriculum project where they will send around a collection of 20 manuscripts to different campuses for 1 semester. Original objects that students can have, and faculty could plan seminars around and do small exhibitions around. And this is a way of getting manuscripts to new audiences. What about physical facsimiles? You know, facsimiles, physical facsimiles have existed, well, for centuries, but very high quality ones, you know, in the recent decades have been produced in increasing numbers. And, you know, institutions and individuals are still willing to pay in the low thousands for, you know, a high-end facsimile of, say, the Book of Kells. In fact, there are 2 facsimile resellers, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, Facsimile Finder and Xeris, and they will help you and your library build a collection of facsimiles. But of course, you know, we're aware of problems with facsimiles. There are lots of problems with facsimiles. They don't quite, even though they can be very carefully made, they don't quite convey the sense of the original. And then, of course, there's a survival bias problem, or actually selection bias. Only the greatest, most beautiful, most famous manuscripts are turned into high-end facsimiles. I think I was, you know, manuscripts are hard to model digitally and hard to make physical facsimiles out of. I was really impressed by the video by Beth Fisher about digitally modeling the complexities of the topography of the page and how the reflective qualities of gold leaf can vary and how that can be modeled digitally. I think that's very promising. I've been thinking a bit about facsimiles as well of other types of art objects. This is a really intriguing thing. This is actually made by the Factum Arte Foundation, a kind of leading organization in high-end, extremely carefully produced facsimiles. This is actually this white thing on the right is a perfectly 3D printed relief of Fra Angelico's Prado Annunciation, right? So this is not just a 2-dimensional reproduction. This has, you know, down to the, I think, 100th of a millimeter in relief of the original object. This is the back of what looks like the back of a wooden panel painting. It's actually a facsimile that's 3D printed and colorized, including all the wormholes, the insect damage, the labels. These are not affixed labels. These are 3D printed. And, you know, how can these technologies be harnessed for manuscript studies? And Factum Arte, they've also made things like a topographically exact replica of the Herefordshire map, right? And I think we're going to hear a little bit about this topographical approach to the parchment page from Bill Endries in his work on 3D visualization. And Factum Arte, they've also made these kind of huge topographically accurate reproductions of manuscripts at enormous scale. They recently published a book. This is a really fascinating kind of new addition to the field. It has about 40 essays and case studies, The Aura in the Age of Digital Materiality. And I recommend it, though only a couple of the articles are really related to manuscripts in particular. So, you know, can we kind of blend the digital and the material facsimile? We've all probably seen this, right? Turning the pages is kind of Web 1.0 equivalent, you know, this kind of animated feature, you know, fairly rudimentary. This dates from, I think, around 2005. You know, at the time it was thrilling. Now it seems quite dated. But you know, things have advanced in leaps and bounds. I mean, this is an installation by an artist called David Smalls. This is actually quite old. This was premiered in 2002 at Documenta. It's called The Illuminated Manuscript. That was the name of the project, and it's an overhead projected kind of gathering of pages, and you can turn it, and the projector would read your hand gestures and sort of turn the text with that. And this is from 2002, but I imagine that, you know, with current advances in projection technology and digital paper, for example, you know, we're on the brink of, if people are interested in it, really pushing the boundaries of what the conjunction of the digital and the material facsimile can bring us. So these are just some kind of scattered thoughts, and I hope they kind of jump off some of the discussion points what we've heard so far, and lead to some of the discussions we'll have tomorrow. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm relieved that stopping sharing screen worked well at that point. All right. Orietta de Rold, would you give us your thoughts next, please?
Yes. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the lovely introduction. And thank you also for the 3 amazing presentations that we had today. One of the wonderful things about this meeting is that I couldn't attend yesterday meeting, but this morning and during my lunchtime, I had a little bit of catch up, and it really is fabulous to see what sort of discussion this meeting have been generating over the 2 days. So there might be probably a little bit of overlap from what Nicholas has said, but hopefully not too much overlap. So for me, all 3 speakers in different ways have demonstrated a significant movement in the study of manuscript culture in the digital age, a movement which on the one hand may have been exacerbated by COVID, and I'm here thinking about the great examples that Laura presented to us, but also about the direction of the field COVID or no COVID. And here I'm thinking about Daniel and Alessandro's project. These last 2 projects are the result of, I think, a really important vision and also realization. So how do we then put the vision into practice, which could only happen in a digital world? In both of these presentations discussed, of course, access, discovery, collaboration, accessibility, platform operability, etc. And this, I think, leads me to to something that for me is really important, which is the idea of affordance. So affordances, according to the first person who coined this word, Gibson, define in a very general way, define affordances as the properties of an object. And I don't mean to go all conceptual here, but just to offer this as a reflection. In essence, affordance is about use and how individuals choose to use an object. But it can also be extended to include not only the uses of an object, but also the object itself viewed in the light of those uses. Laura's reflection made me think about this important element of our work with DH, but with manuscript, I think, in general. She asked, have we learned to make the most of our virtual world? And I think this is a really excellent question, because I think we're still learning about this virtual world and its potential, and of course also its limitations. But I also believe that ultimately our imagination can have no boundaries, and technological advances will usually come with it. Of course, there is the habit and the worry of change, but the wonderful demonstration about the authority files that Daniel showed us in his project, and on which also Lynn remarked, and also, of course, Nicholas has just picked up as well, is indeed a response to the affordances of electronic cataloging. But yet, are we limiting the affordance of what we are aiming to create by pre-establishing what can be discovered? Are we limiting the potential of what we are creating by design? And these, to me, currently are genuine questions, and not a criticism in any way of the wonderful work which has been presented here. And I would like just to contextualize what I just said with a little bit of background. So affordances, and therefore what we can do with this object and how we can push the object, and what we can then do in our work with technologies, is something that I've been worrying about quite a lot recently when I was thinking about medieval paper. In that field, the technological discourse about this material was geared towards economic advantage. Paper is cheap, parchment is expensive, and that's why the former is elected and chosen in written culture during the medieval period. What, however, became evident during my studies is that the affordance of paper goes beyond cost, and the medieval mind was fascinated with paper for its properties and possibility. Similarly, the affordance of DH is not an economic advantage, we know that, but a nexus of possibilities. At the core of it all, however, we need to put knowledge. As we have heard over the past 2 days, affordance then shapes the complex way in which DH investigates knowledge, and all these projects that we've heard about are an example of that. And of course, this is not the place to debate whether DH is a tool, a methodology, a discipline, but we ought to reflect on the fact that DH is a rather new idea. I know 20 years, more than 20 years, but still fairly new, which still requires explanation and justification in certain academic circles. Of course, I'm here preaching to the converter, which sometimes is not very helpful, but this is important, especially because more and more early career researchers are using this cutting edge discipline, which is truly interdisciplinary, exciting, and enabling. And therefore, I think we really need to make sure that what we are doing here, we are working with knowledge. In all the 3 papers that we just heard and the projects that they were discussing, there is a sense of continuous process, and also a sense of seeking out really the affordance of the object, and at the same time the choices that might derive from enhancing the potential of this object. And I think these are important thought to bear in mind when we talk about this sort of project work. So on the one hand, projects enable research, discovery of information, but also participation and discussion. And to me, that is also knowledge. Immanuel Kant, as you might remember, defined philology as a discipline which explored not only languages, but also critical knowledge of books. That critical knowledge is the crucial element in the understanding of books as cultural objects And this intellectual curiosity defines the research question that we seek to answer from our work in or with DH. Laura again mentioned the research blog which have emerged from the work of the transcribers. I think this is a point that we should not underestimate. And I think we should really, really more and more talk about this important element when we carry out detailed digital work. Close study of any type of handwritten culture will bring insights and new ways of thinking about that culture. But we need more colleagues thinking about this subject. To a certain extent, what Nicola was saying about how do we bring in more people in our field. And I would like now to move on to the last part of my talk by talking about the cunning plan that here in Cambridge, we thought with some colleagues to put in place. And I will come now to talk a little bit about training. The stimulus in cataloging, aggregating resources, digitizing and making available complete manuscripts has transformed the level and type of information with which national and institutional libraries make available to researchers. In this sense, the numerous digitization projects and international collaborative efforts between international libraries have given access to outstanding resources. And we've seen some examples so far, and they are just amazing. That is amazing work. It is, however, noticeable that a variable quantity of descriptive material and metadata is available. And as I have argued in the past, digital platforms have certainly a wider range of affordances than analog in catalogs, and we all know that as well, even though we are still learning to use their full potential. What we know, however, is that they enable a greater degree of flexibility, the possibility of aggregating silos website, discoverability of data, etc. But in order to do that, we also need people who knows how to prepare this sort of material. It is noticeable that Daniel and Alessandro's projects are the result of important monetary investments, as well as a large team of developers, scholars, and interested parties. And this is, of course, the ideal scenario. I mean, it's just amazing to have such a rich community of people and collaborators to bring about the realization of those wonderful projects. But you also need the money to do that. So if that is the ideal scenario, what happens if such infrastructure cannot be created? And more importantly, as the DH field grows, we need more trained early career scholars to join this field, and their work needs to be recognized as well as that training. And here I really move into the very last few thoughts of my response. It is often the case, with some notable exception, that DH training is provided as an adjunct training or a self-taught mode of learning. But I really believe that integration of this type of training into postgraduate programs, which is fully recognized and part, at least in the UK, and part of the final grade, as I would call it, is essential. And this is important not only to recruit more interested colleagues, but also to obtain a wider recognition from the academic community. Indeed, recognition, and we heard about the question of citation, some colleagues have already mentioned that as an issue that was raised earlier, is one element of this recognition. But citation is only one story of what it means recognizing DH work in the academy. And I will just leave this to that. Going back to training. In Cambridge, a collaboration between Jane Freeman, who is the medieval manuscript specialist at the UL, Hugh Jones, who is the head of the digital library unit and digital humanities coordinator at the UL, and myself, has produced interesting and encouraging results when we try to integrate training in postgraduate teaching. This collaboration has pioneered the teaching of digital protocols in the study of medieval manuscripts in a project entitled Virtual Pedagogy. We call it VPED or VIPED, some call it VIPED, VPED. So this project aims to integrate current digital research practices in the study of medieval and modern handwritten culture in postgraduate teaching. And the sessions are designed to enhance the taught learning and teaching experience with resources delivered via an online platform and the digital library at the UL. The teaching contributes, is fully integrated into the textual and related study course, which is the manuscript course of the MPhil in medieval and Renaissance culture that we offer at the Faculty of English. And it is also an option course, which I run, which is entitled Medieval Books and Text in the Digital Age. The course integrates the teaching of TI in the pedagogical provisions of the faculty and invites students to consider the standard for the description of manuscripts by transcriptions and scholarly presentation. By learning this standard, students also study the importance of opening up the data to digital presentation, analysis, and collaborative work, which I suppose then in turn can also support and enable the development of digital edition, but I also start thinking a little bit about presentation. So this session, I think, are really important because they really help to clarify and at the same time to think more carefully about the manuscript, about the objects, and the work that the student then go and is uploaded in the digital library. So somehow the cataloging and the work that is done then contributes to the work done in the university library. So in conclusion, I urge colleagues never to separate research from DH projects, and above all to talk about the digital knowledge that this project can generate. This is what I think it is so exciting in what we do in DH, and I also think that's the future of manuscript studies. And yeah, really, it is important to combine all these three elements: DH, knowledge, trading, and hopefully have more people on board going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. We are going to have so much to talk about, but before we open up the floor, we will hear from our third panelist, Kelly Tuttle.
Thanks, Amy. And thanks, Nick and Orietta, for those responses. They included things that I had definitely not thought about, and I am excited to hear more about the virtual pedagogy thing at Cambridge. That sounds like a very good plan. I think it should be instituted elsewhere. So, as Amy mentioned, I'm a cataloger, and so I felt like this particular panel was right up my street. I really appreciated hearing about the projects and the work that are being done to establish a greater number and variety of names and places, and to bring together resources that would have all had to have been searched separately before. It's wonderful and inspiring work. And with that in mind, I have a couple of observations and questions. And I'm going to do a lot of sort of fangirling because I just am very excited about the HMML thing. So I am perhaps most excited about HMML's new authority file because it looks amazing. It's uniform, easy to use, easy to search, easy to update. These are all wonderful things. The data will also be shareable, usable, queryable, visualizable, if that's a word, in lots of ways, thanks to the type of database that they're using. And most importantly for the catalogers working not just for HMML, but anywhere, is the very straightforward search and use functions. It looks really good. I'm impressed that you have worked out protocols about how to establish names for the different areas in which you have expertise at the moment. And I hope that these protocols can be used as guidelines for, or can be offered anyway as guidelines for other projects attempting to establish name authorities for less well documented name types. I think that one of the problems with trying to establish a name authority is that you see that you need to establish this, and but sort of working out all the protocols and sort of figuring out all of the rules for the different types of names, it just seems like it's a ton of work. And so you've done it. That's awesome. We would like it if you would share. So yes, I would like that. I'm also super excited about the contribution that HMML authority file will bring, since they are not only taking into account various forms that the names can have, including family names and honorifics and nicknames and things that just make Arabic and Persian and other types of names complex, but also because they're contributing data from the Mali manuscript project and also the Indo-Persian manuscripts that I think are yet to be cataloged. And both of those areas have real shortages of established names, places, and works. So any contribution would be welcome, but a contribution with numbers in the way that HMML can contribute is just amazing. It will be helpful for catalogers working with Islamic materials all over. And I'll also be interested, though, in seeing the type of research that can come out of just digging into the data that you will have available on the database and seeing what kinds of models and things can be made with it. I also really like the projects that centralize access to disparate data sets, as the Maṣāḥǝft project is doing. And I like that Alessandro mentioned that COVID gave them time to work specifically on the platform. And I think that we frequently like to see COVID as, this, I mean, obviously it is a terrible thing, but it made everyone be separate and we couldn't work with our materials. But on the other hand, people who regularly work with the materials, you couldn't go there and work with them. And so you have to think of something else to do. And so looking at the data that you're producing was something that was, you were sort of forced into it, but in the end, it was probably a good thing to kind of think about what data are you producing? How are you producing it? How could it be better constructed to make it more usable after everyone can go back and look at the materials again. So I also really liked in the Maṣāḥǝft project that you are including paracontents, I think you call them, into the cataloging. And this is something that I'm always kind of agitating to include in cataloging here. But as anyone who catalogs in the US knows, there's not really a very good place to include these kind of paratexts and paracontents, reader's notes and things like that. And so having a way to sort of structure this data that could be used as a model for other kinds of projects is really useful. And I'm interested in seeing how that will work out. Listening to these talks, especially thinking about access and discovery and inclusion and exclusion, in terms of cataloging, I go back and forth between thinking, oh yes, that extra information on bindings and sewing, for example, from yesterday, or reader's notes from today would be great to have in a catalog record. I always want to put as much as I can, but because the more information we have, the more ways there are to gain access to it and to query it, but only if it's structured in a way that allows for this. And then on the other hand, and sort of because of this second thought, I then swing around to thinking, oh no, we can't have all of this data because, for one, it takes way too much time. And for projects, in the States anyway, that are funded as sort of short-term cataloging, do as much as you can, and in as, you know, as much detail as you can while still doing the maximum number of things. It just doesn't allow for the type of detail that you might want. And two, no cataloger has all of the necessary expertise to put in all of this information, even if they wanted to. And so it involves bringing in a lot more people, which is what slows it down. And then three, as Doug mentioned yesterday, the richer the data, the more difficult it is to bring it together with other data. And so you have a sort of very detailed and beautiful description. You've involved 15 people. It's great. It's sitting there. It's like looking at the physical object if you're reading it, except then nobody else can get to it. It can't be shared, really. It can't be used in bigger projects. And so then you have to wonder what the point of it was. So in order to include as much data as we might like in a way that makes sharing straightforward and querying workable, cataloging, I think, would need to be more of a sort of iterative process and also a collective process. And I think that's kind of what we're getting from HMML and from the Maṣāḥǝft projects, because they're starting with cataloging, but they're sort of circling back to it after they've kind of tried a couple of things. And now we're getting really more useful structures. In regard to the first point about cataloging, that it should be sort of iterative and collective, I think the way it is now, it gets that, you get that a little bit, because catalogers are generally not working from nothing, right? They're working from an inventory, or they're working from older catalog records, and maybe those are wrong and they're enhancing them. Maybe they're right and they're still enhancing them, but it's returning to an earlier form of something and then, you know, iterating over it again to make it better. And then also, you have to consult with colleagues from time to time when there's something that you don't know. But there's no real structure. It's chance or it's necessity, but it's not really a plan that is in place already when you catalog. And I've always rather wanted manuscript cataloging to be more cooperative or collective. And this is especially true for projects such as the one that I work on now, the Manuscripts of the Muslim World project, that have short-term funding and more languages than one cataloger can reasonably be expected to know. So with this in mind, Laura's talk about the gamification of online scholarship could possibly offer another way to support aspects of cataloging or data collection or production for a project like the one that I'm working on. And I'm curious to to think about it more. So her guidelines for successful crowdsourced scholarship: a well-defined task and a timeline, a low barrier to entry, easy communication, and a community. And are very good. I really like these guidelines. I'm also still wondering though, how do you build community when you don't already have one that you can kind of tap for people who will then tap other people? And then my other question about gamification is, how much does there have to be in order to make it successful? So thinking about the Sfera project, are the judges, for example, necessary, or is it enough to have a specific task and a specific time limit? And these are just, I'm just wondering what you think about that. And I guess we might be able to discover more about this on Friday when you give the report about how the Demoiselle, Pèlerinage Demoiselle, I can't remember the title, that project is going, because that seems to have, it has a very set timeline, but it doesn't have the judges and it doesn't really have the competition aspect. And so I'll be curious to see how that one works out. And I'm asking these because online crowdsourced scholarly cataloging is something that I really want to work with, like, a lot. But the experiments that I've seen of sort of online crowdsourced cataloging have not worked really at all. And I don't know if it's because the task is not well defined, or if the timeline is too wibbly and people don't understand that they have to have something done at a certain point, or if there's not enough gamification. And so I just would like to think about it more, and it would be nice to think about it with other people. Yes, so, all right. And then So just to sort of, these are the thoughts that I've had about these. So just to sort of wrap up, for those of us who have been working with the physical item, I already mentioned this, the manuscripts, COVID gave us time to go home and think about the data, which I think is actually a really useful thing to have happened. And so thinking about how you clean it, thinking about producing documentation for what you're doing. And as you produce the documentation going, that doesn't really seem like the best way to do it. Maybe we should be trying something else. I think these are all actually really useful results of what could have been, or what has been kind of a difficult time. So I hope that as we all come out of this, what we've been able to think through or test as ways of working with the data and integrating metadata production, which is catalogers in many cases for manuscript studies, with data structuring and shareability will continue to improve, as I think has been modeled in the HMML project and in the Maṣāḥǝft project. Thanks.
Thank you. So now we come to the part of the day where everyone can participate in the discussion. If you have a question for our panelists or for our speakers from the first session, please type it in the chat, or just type in the chat that you have a question that you would like to ask. The panelists are also welcome to ask each other questions and follow up on the initial points if you would like.
I have a question just to start off for Orietta. And I guess I'm just trying to be sort of, I guess, a bit thought-provoking, maybe playing the devil's advocate a little bit, but, and I think the emphasis on the importance of DH pedagogy for graduate students is so important. I guess my question, it's sort of a two-part question. I mean, graduate students are so overburdened today. I was one not that long ago, but I know that today it's gotten, worse with, having to prepare for the job market, having to be active on social media, having to, have a secondary project, intercultural projects, etc. Right? There's so many demands on graduate students, and particularly in the UK with the, relatively short PhD programs. I guess the inevitable question is what are students not learning when they're learning the DH skills? What are they giving up? Or is that a false kind of dichotomy? And is DH broadly writ? I mean, is it an auxiliary science of history, or is it a kind of primary science of history? These are big questions, but I thought just to start us off.
No, thank you for this question. I like to think it's a bit provocative because it's like saying, is paleography an ancillary discipline, or is it something that every medievalist should really know? The same thing for codicology, same thing for manuscript studies. I think you're absolutely right about the pressure in the market, and the graduate program in the UK, as you know, is slightly different from America. Or from the States, sorry, I shouldn't generalize. I'm very sorry about that. And there is, to begin with, before a student embark on a PhD, they usually do either an MA or an MPhil. And regarding what we do in Cambridge, so there is a short mandatory training as part of the larger training in manuscript studies. And then there is an option course, and therefore the student elects to be wanting to know more about the DH, and that is all while the cataloging coming in, etc. So somehow the students choose how and what they might be interested, I wouldn't say to specialize on, because the dissertation then is another thing, but at least as part of the option courses that they take, they can choose, do they want to take my course in DH, or do they want to take a course by Professor Nikki Zeman on Piers Plowman? So there is this sort of idea of choice, but I do think that as a student or a medievalist prepare for the job market, having a recognized DH skills, which I wouldn't say has been rubber stamped, but effectively with the MPhil, they get the transcript and then they know what the courses they've done. I do think that is a plus in that training. And then, yes, I think this is a debate probably for more people, not just me, to see how they see possible additional training and it's knowledge. So I try not to use skills. I do try not to use skills.
Laura Morreale has a comment on this to
I
contribute.
do, and thank you so much for bringing this up, both of you. I start with the beginning that, DH, I think, has a public relations problem. In my experience with working with students at the MA level, when they came in and they were defining themselves as medievalists, they wanted nothing to do with DH work, right? They were like, I'm a medievalist. That's what I do. I'm not interested in computers. And so, this was at Fordham, and we would have sort of projects going on that older students would be working on. And, of course, I would say, oh, fine, you don't want to do computers, no worries, that's fine. But what was going on in the office, right, was that that's what was happening, is that we were looking at manuscripts online. We were making decisions about or thinking about, a historical timeline. And so they came to understand that is where the work was going on, right? So in my mind, it's less about saying you have to learn TEI standards than it is to show them, look at how the conversations that we're having and how fascinating they are and how this thing helps us do that better. Right. So in terms of whether you would want to integrate something formally, I don't think it works as well as if you just model, and we just model as a field how great this can be. So that would be my response to that.
Thank you. Those are both great, insightful answers.
There have been some comments in the chat. I don't know if anyone who submitted comments wants to jump in vocally. Can I ask a question? Which is slightly changing the topic from DH, but Orietta, you mentioned, I'm trying to find my notes to make sure I have your words right, but how some of this kind of digital research could have limitations. And it made me think of when we were doing the Mapping Manuscript Migrations project. And we put in 3 data sets from, that all sort of focus on medieval manuscripts. And as we were trying to find those data elements that overlapped in a sort of data Venn diagram, it kind of came down to names, places, works, conceptual works, and manuscripts, physical objects. And that's where we decided, because we had only a certain amount of time, that's where we decided to focus our energies. And while I am 100% behind our decision, I think it was the right decision, there's always this voice in the back of my mind, well, what are we leaving out? If in mapping manuscript migrations and the user interface, especially when you go to it, there's people, manuscripts, events, and something else I'm forgetting. So we're in that interface, we're literally funneling people into these research paths. I think our internal answer to that was to, the data is all available in RDF. You can download it. You can do Sparkle query, so you can do your own searching. But in the interface, where the majority of the people who are going to come query that data are going to go, there are these limitations. So I just wondered if anyone, really, the speakers who spoke, the people who presented earlier this morning, or anyone on the panel, especially Orietta, have further thoughts about that.
If I just quickly say something, I think what you said is exactly right. How do we mediate the possibility of all what we tag and catalog, regardless of the protocol we use, in then making it an interface that then people can actually use, and what would people want to use? You see, I'm a codicologist. I also work a lot with structural codicology. So for me, really, I want to know quires, I want to know material, I want to know that. And you're absolutely right that it's not possible to make everybody happy. And I think that's the challenge, right? The challenge of second guessing what people might be interested in, given the wealth of material that actually we have there. And that's what I call it, limitation or challenge or affordances. You know, are we ever going to be able, you know, I'm not saying like a dream, to create this sort of interface where I go there and I say, right, I'm not interested in names, I'm not interested in people, give me only queries and query queries. You see, so somehow this flexible interface then relate to the data. I know it's dreamland, but this is really an interesting, I don't know, it's just what is the next step, more than nobody's doing a good job sort of thing. That's where I was coming from. I don't know whether, you know, there might be other people who have got different experiences as well.
Well, and I think that dreamland can be a good place to spend time. I think one of the things that that Lynn's question raises for me is sort of that the question doesn't always come before the answer or the data in this case. Like sometimes you start with a question and that leads to the data that you pull together. Other times you start with data and it leads to questions that perhaps wouldn't have emerged in Dreamland. So I feel like you sort of need to work at it from both directions. And in either case, and this is true in any field, in any place where you might be asking questions, we all have, I think, internal limits on what questions we think can be answered. You know, that we're sort of like limiting our questions before we even ask them. And so being in places like, hopefully, you know, a conference like this, one thing that you get to hear are other people's questions or other perspectives, and that show you where your own categories, where the edges of them are, and you didn't know those edges were there.
Alessandro has a comment to make on this topic.
Yes, many thanks. I wanted just to bring a piece of our experience since Orietta stressed the interest in choirs, and actually we also in our project have a lot of people who have a strong interest in choirs, choir structures, and so on. And for example, we had a problem of representing the concepts which are presupposed by La Syntaxe du Codex. So this influential book, which is published by Marilena Magnaci, Patrick Andrist, and Paul Canard, with all the implications related to every aspect that has to be considered in order to describe a manuscript. So actually, we tried to transfer exactly this updated view of the codex into our XML TI structure in order to, let's say, to represent the problem. So that's why I think that in this case, I would say we had a fruitful interaction between digital humanities and actual codicological problems. So the problems of DH is that of, in the end, having masks where there is something pre-prepared that has to, let's say, fit in, and and the problems and experience and the first-hand data do not come first. I think this is what we have. So flexibility is everything here in order to have really a satisfactory representation of problems and work and description. So that's all I wanted to say. But since choirs were actually exactly the center of this, I think we have a lot of ways in which choirs and digital humanities can interact fruitfully.
Daniel has a comment, a response for Orietta.
Yeah, thank you very much. First, with regard to Orietta, just moving away from training a little bit, I think the issue of recognition remains very important. I checked with my colleagues today before I spoke, and still at my former university, there are no guidelines for DH projects for tenure and promotion, which means that until we regardless of what field we may be in, we really need to get that established, because however we wish to promote these, and if we really wish to promote these with excellence, we have to find a way to get that done. And right now, it's not even at my local university nor at my former university are these part of the history department T&P guidelines. So people kind of push it off, and therefore it doesn't get transferred to students, and it kind of becomes this cycle. To Kelly, I really appreciated a lot of your comments, and one of the things that kind of stood out for me there with regard to both recognition and guidelines is you know, back in the day when curators and catalogers would produce catalogs, it would be these beautifully published works, right? And then we'd go onto the shelf and there would be this kind of recognition of like this gorgeous volume that you could pull it out and you could spend your time. And I love working through all of that because you can see the kind of the collaboration behind the scenes in order to produce those. But with online catalogs, in some instances, you don't even know who's doing the record. And so catalogers and curators are kind of left doing this massive amount of work, but you know, it's not even recognizable to, you know, who's actually creating that record and, you know, what happens. Whereas you might have gone before and pulled off the book off the shelf, which I still have my catalogs, you know, above me. And you know, Franco Bruni is a musicologist in Malta. I mean, he's semi-divine for me, because without him, I wouldn't be able to do my work. But, you know, so there's this side of it too. And I think about that with how back to your point, is that those catalogs had guidelines. I mean, a lot of those printed catalogs are these beautiful guidelines at the front of like, why did I catalog it this way? You know, all of the kind of the methodology that goes into producing a catalog record was at the front of these printed catalogs. And we just don't do a good job of that right now with online catalogs. So I really take that point seriously. And I've got a major note here about how we as an institution can speak with my executive director, how we can actually build that out and provide that kind of structural methodology for the public so that people can go and look at it and use it to help improve it in a more collaborative way. So it's a point well taken, and I'm really glad that you made it.
So there's some discussion in the chat about where people get DH skills, and some people are talking about library science programs. And I thought that was kind of an interesting, it's a side chat, and I want to try to bring it into the conversation a little bit, because there's something I'm not quite sure how to articulate right now, but this separation of information science, library and information science, from humanities research. And I think we're seeing especially with digital humanities, that there's actually a lot of blending going on there. And I wonder if anyone wants to, who's been in the chat talking about this, wants to respond to that. Maybe Lisa, do you want to start? I see a hand.
Yeah, sure. So, I was talking with Johanna Green about the experiences that we've both had. I teach in a library science program. So I'm teaching students who are coming already with this understanding and appreciation for authorities and controlled vocabularies. I don't have to explain to them why that matters when you're talking about cataloging manuscripts. But I'm also going to be teaching paleography to graduate students at Yale next semester. So I'll be teaching students who are new to the information science piece. And I think it will be interesting to see how to balance those two things. So my library students already have the informatics piece, and I'm layering the book history on top of it. Whereas the Yale students, it'll be just the opposite, that they're coming to me to talk about paleography and codicology, and I'm going to try and integrate these digital methodologies into that. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that plays out, because I think it's so important. Not that everyone needs to identify as a digital medievalist or a digital humanist, but these are tools to put in your toolbox as you take out into the world. The same way that you learn date and place of manuscripts. This is just another tool that you can and should acquire to take out with you into the world. And then one more comment, just to plug, the Medieval Academy has been, we have this database of medieval digital resources, and I'll put the link in the chat. where we are offering peer review of digital projects, precisely so that people can take that to review committees and to job searches and say, yeah, I did this thing, and look, it has the Medieval Academy of America stamp of approval. And we're really hoping that by continuing that, we'll be able to help give the credit to digital projects to show that effort and that has scholarly value on par with a big fat monograph. That's the idea, at least.
I want to finish a thought that I was trying to articulate, and I think what's bothering me in my head that's coming from this conversation about library science versus a humanities degree is that library LIS students are being perceived as the service providers, and the humanists are the recipients of that service. And I think that dichotomy it really rubs me the wrong way as a humanist who's working in a library. And I'd like to see humanists servicing themselves, so to speak. I'll leave it at that. There are a couple of comments coming in. Catherine Chandler would like to make a comment.
Hi, yes, I'll be very brief. I am actually a librarian and also a medievalist, but somebody who started out as a librarian. I'll be teaching at 3 different library schools next semester. I'll be teaching rare books cataloging and advanced cataloging, and that will be in a traditional MARC cataloging mode and moving a little bit into BibFrame with the Library of Congress. So I want to say that I wish that there was a little bit more of a cross path between people who work with digital humanities, people who are traditionally academics working more with catalogers and teaching these courses, and that library schools worked more within that framework. I also kind of want to give a heads up to everybody for Kalamazoo for Anna Seebach Larson's panel on So You Want to Be a Librarian, because we'll be discussing a lot of these issues and things that come up for that. So just FYI.
Thanks, Catherine. Matt, Ayla, you have an interesting comment to make. Do you want to follow up?
Sure. I was just thinking, I mean, hearing this discussion of so many grad students who are become interested in DH through manuscript studies, which is what also how I came to want to do DH. But there are also so many grad programs that don't have, including my own in Penn English, that don't require or even really like encourage paleography and codicology skills. It's an option over the summer, but it's not something that's like fully integrated into the coursework. But where I did my master's, it was required. And so that's, I don't know, there were a lot of projects that emerged out of my master's, but not so many that have emerged in the PhD program where we also get a master's. And I just wonder, I do think that is a core skill that every medievalist, of course, needs to know. And I think it just would open the door for more general curiosity about DH, even beyond manuscript studies.
Thank you. Beth, there's so many comments popping in. Beth Fisher, I would like to see if she wants to elaborate on her comment. And is she?
Hi, all. I just wanted to say I'm coming at this from the side of art history and not being so much in a medieval specific position, and what an art museum might pose as a separate place than a library program for this kind of work, and maybe even thinking about the possibilities of working across some of these areas that have been traditionally relegated to support programs at institutions, and the roles that they might play in developing programs that might live in a museum or in a library, as we've seen more digital projects living in. So I didn't really have much developed thought around that, other than that I'd just like to see more of that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you. Orietta has a question for Kelly.
It's not so much of a question, but I was really taking about what you were saying about cataloging and crowdsourcing, and what you were saying about that crowdsourcing cataloging doesn't seem to work. And I thought, what do you think we should do to make it work? Because this is my experience as well. I think it's so hard unless I tell everybody that's the template, that's the eye, don't go out of it. And even then we disagree. So, you know, it's just some further thought really on that, because I think if we could crack that as well, it would be quite amazing.
Yes, I would like to be able to crack that, but I don't know, because I mean, it's true, like cataloging is very rigid, but I don't think you have to, you don't have to request the information from people in a rigid way. I mean, you can go, once you have the information, you can go and make it rigid in the way that cataloging wants afterwards. But sort of having people just figure out, what is this text, who wrote it, what's it look like, where did it come from, you know, those kind of things. People like figuring that stuff out. And so I don't.
Could I jump in here too and just give some
Crowdsourced, except now I'm going to sound like a cataloger with a big chip on my shoulder, but like maybe because it's branded as cataloging. I mean, if it were branded as something else that is more approachable, like discovery or, you know, finding new things, it would fly better. And I also think that some of what Laura talked about, like having a very clear timeline and having a very clear set of texts that you're working with, and having a task that is clearly defined, but not so clearly defined that it becomes scary, as cataloging seems to, might help in that way. So yes, I want to keep thinking about it, and I think I will talk to Laura after this meeting to get some more ideas.
I think Laura was going to jump in, actually. Was that you, Laura?
Yes, sorry. There was a glitch in the tech. I would just say that when we started off thinking that, someone might want to look at La Sfera, we were like, oh, no one's going to want to do that. So, I mean, the truth of the matter is there are people out there who live to do the thing that you do, who love it so much, right? And so when you start with your friends and they get all, they geek out about it, which they will, and my friends did too, right? And then they sort of, influence their friends. It's not that hard of an ask, right? You can get to 50 people doing this much more quickly than you think. So I would encourage you to think about that, and to, we think that what we do is so specialized, but there's a lot of us out there. So I would encourage you to think optimistically about it.
But Laura, just to jump in, I mean, do you think that will still be the case, after COVID, when we're all, like twice as busy as we were before, because we've got to catch up and we've been, downsized and saddled with additional tasks? I mean, and if there's a proliferation of crowdsourced projects, as there is not perhaps now, I mean, will people just not have the time, or they'll choose a different one to do? I mean, there's a limit. I mean, there's a logical limit to human labor, I suppose.
I mean, absolutely. But I will just tell you some of the reflections on these experiences. One participant wrote that she just stopped eating, or she ignored her job. Like all she wanted to do was work on this transcription thing. And then
that's not good.
Well, she's like, I was obsessed, right? Which, right. For a short period of time, being obsessed with something, whatever, that's fine. And then someone else said, in sort of doing a reflection a couple months afterwards, was like, oh, I was remembering La Sfera. It was like summer camp. It was so awesome, right? So you can really, and back to Kelly, you can encapsulate that in a small moment. And, you can gamify any way you want. Maybe each team has to reach a certain number of, reviewed entries per, by the end of the time, or something like, whatever. I mean, there's lots of ways to make it work. You don't have to have the judges, and you don't have to have that gamification, but it does make people kind of dig in, right? And yeah, so I think it helps. It's not a sine qua non, as the Difira project suggests, right? That's a different kind of approach. and it still brings in that kind of community. It still, as Orietta was saying, depends on knowledge, right? That's really a crowdsourcing of knowledge in a different kind of way. But you can set it up so it'll work, I'm sure.
And I just chatted out the link to describe to the Cairo Geniza project that Amey and others at Penn are involved in. And that involves, there's a simple triage. So is this fragment in Hebrew or in Arabic, and these are sort of there have to be multiple positives for fragments to get sorted properly. And so, that is a kind of very, that's hard data that you're getting from a kind of very elemental kind of citizen.
My 86-year-old father worked on that project. He would just sit in front of the TV at night sorting Cairo Geniza fragments.
There you go. And then a related question is, the credit for that. Is your 86-year-old father, does he get 1/1000th of a kind of publication credit in the kind of more of a sort of hard sciences kind of a mode of assigning credit, multiple authors to huge research projects? That's an interesting question too.
There's a question from Anne Marguerite, or a couple of questions. Would you like to raise those?
Hello to all. Well, I think I made a question, I phrased the question in the chat. So I'm currently working as an independent scholar, running my own small business on manuscript projects. I'd like to learn more skills. I'd like to be able to talk over projects, about digitization projects with institutions. But how do I start to train myself and to get some basic knowledge? And what are the basic tools I must know? And what are the basic tools or tools that are slightly less important, perhaps? So I'd like to. Well, I would actually need the introductory courses for students you're offering. So do you any suggestions for this?
I'm looking at Laura, but I don't know if that's fair.
Well, there's, there are more and more online offerings happening out there, especially now. I think maybe like the Rare Book School at the University of Virginia, or the Ben Albritton and I had offered a class 2 years in a row at the Beinecke that we couldn't do this summer. That is another possibility for something that could be an online course. And there's really something to be said for taking some of this training and doing it in an online environment for exactly the reason you said, Anne Marguerite, because it is so much more, it provides so much access, and it doesn't lock it up in a privileged silo. I think you're absolutely right that that's something that everyone should be thinking about.
Yeah, well, thanks to everyone for the excellent suggestions in the chat, and thanks to you, Lisa, for the additions. Thank you.
I think I was looking at Laura because what her project offers is an opportunity to try something and not necessarily learn, right? Like you're being part of this experiment. As you're part of this process of doing a transcription, you start learning the technology, you start getting your feet wet, so to speak. And I think that's one of the values or one of the outcomes, I guess, of Laura's projects, are that they're good introductions to how you can do DH work without being a digital humanist to start.
Indeed. And that goes back to that question about public relations, right? I think DH for so many people is so scary. And you're like, where do I start? And of course, a lot of it depends on and what tools should you use and all of that stuff. It depends really on what is it that, what do you want to do? And of course, we can't all be specialists in every tool and every methodology and every, I tend to be a text person. I know there are great tools out there for manipulating images that I just could never imagine being any good at. So it helps, I think, in some ways to start off with, where are you in terms of your discipline? If you're a historian, there's something called programming historian, which might help you. But different disciplines work in these different tools. And I think that would be a good way to start off. Like, what do I need to learn? Like, well, what are other people in my field using and why, and what does that do for them, right? So that's, I think, a good way to even start off on where you need to direct yourself. But, try something that makes you feel less scared about DH. I think that's always a good thing to do if you can.
Well, I'm not scared anymore. It is just where to start.
I'm still scared.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily an independent scholar problem. I mean, I think it, like in universities, when we were starting out on a linked data project, I'm at Penn and I was looking around, I was like, who knows how to de-link data? And it was sort of like crickets. There just aren't, you just sort of have to like get in and kind of not teach yourself, but just sort of just get into the projects and see where it takes you, I think.
Okay, well, thanks.
Yeah, sure. Doug Emery has a comment.
Yeah, so this is, I started thinking about this because of Orietta's comment that digital humanities is a new term. And I was actually, my graduate background is in philology, ancient philology, which I did back in the 90s before there really were, particularly in a field like that, there really were serious digital tools for doing that kind of work other than word processors. And then I became a programmer. And along the way, I had a work study job in a biology department, and then I worked in university administration. One of the things that always struck me is that scientists didn't do digital science. They just did science, and they used digital tools. And business people don't do digital business. They do their work, and they use digital tools as a matter of course. And it always, the term digital humanities, once I got back into doing cultural heritage projects, it bugged me, because it seemed to me that this is what you do. You use these kind of tools and as a part of your work. And of course, this is not what happens in a lot of places. And I realize why people use the term, because you need to make sort of a distinction that you need people to do this work, but it also sets it off as this other strange thing that's somehow apart from doing humanities work. And it's really, and the more I'm a member of SIMS, the odder it becomes to me, because we do humanities work and we use digital tools all the time, but because that's how you do that kind of work. It's just a part of doing humanities work today.
Yeah.
I agree with you, Doug, and that's why I asked this kind of fake question of, is it an auxiliary, not ancillary, which is not a good term, but auxiliary science. It's embedded. I mean, it's what we do, I think, and there's kind of no going back. I mean, so maybe it's artificial to think of a divide between DH and non-DH. I mean, Laura's projects, I mean, this is traditional transcription. It's, you could do it by hand, but you're doing it using digital tools, right?
Yeah, I think that with the humanities, there's, on the one hand, there's like the way that you get tenure. There's a connection of certain forms and processes to doing the work, and then also I think there's a relationship that the humanities have had to data, which is, say, different from the way that there's a relationship to data in the sciences and in the business world.
I think.
Go ahead.
There's one more question that Nancy Turner has posed a question that I think it would be interesting to at least start answering, and if we can't finish it today, we can finish it tomorrow. But Nancy, would you like to go ahead?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Nice to see everyone. I've just, since I'm, as we would say at the museum, I'm not a text bunny, I'm an image bunny. So I have to ask this question about technology and the use. I've often felt like the use of facial recognition type technology could be well applied to any kind of imagery. And I'm wondering, is there going to be a IIIF that does that kind of image recognition on its own that doesn't rely on keyword searches and that sort of thing? I'd love to hear the panelists from today and yesterday to address that. Thank you.
Could I just jump in? Sorry. and I see that actually Lisa has already put that on the chat. So perhaps she might want to come in and talk about it. But in Stanford, Elaine Trahan and Ben have been working on that, and they've been using visual language recognition to precisely to do that on a large corpora of images. And effectively what they've been doing, they've been trying to search for the invisible or the visible and the pixel and everything else. And I think from what I've seen from them, some of the results, initial results, are quite encouraging. But sorry, Lisa, maybe you want to come in and say
No,
more.
I don't have anything to add to that, except I was just digging around on the Text Technologies website trying to find the specific link to this particular project where they'd been teaching a computer to pull out initials and to find different elements of a page. And I can't find the link specifically, but I'll keep looking, and if I find it, I'll put it in the chat.
Great. Well, we're at 3:30. Should we wrap up for the day, Amey?
Yes, we should. So thank you, everybody, very much for this lively discussion. I hope that you will all rejoin us tomorrow for the third day, when we will be starting again at 10:30 Philadelphia time. And again, the lightning talks are available on YouTube overnight if you're wishing you had more between now and then. And there's also the link that Lynn posted for manuscript studies, the new issue down the road, if you are feeling like you want more then. So thanks again, and looking forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.